Hello and welcome to Pop Culture on Deprogrammed. I am one of your hosts, Keri Smith, and I'm joined by Mystery Chris, who,
Hello.
hello. Do you want to tell them what you were talking about before the show? Wait, hold on. I have to
About my
say this.
prunes?
Yes! You guys, Chris comes on and then just starts talking, and all of it is hilarious. And I'm like, stop it. Just be quiet for 5 minutes and save it.
I'm really upset about my prunes. There's a prune shortage going on right now. I've been to Walmart, HEB, everywhere. They don't have no prunes. So I'm really upset right now because all I want to do is just be home, watch my Antiques Roadshow, and eat my prunes.
No.
I'm a very simple man.
No. I don't even know if you're joking.
I love Antique Roadshow, and I love prunes too.
And you love prunes. I wanted to, before we get started, once again, for anybody who's new, you are watching a new channel. It's called Deprogrammed. You can hit subscribe. We do have all the things. If you want to support, you can share the video. We also have a Subscribe Star, a Patreon, and a Locals. And we're going to start doing book club in Locals soon. So if you want a subscription there and you're already subscribed somewhere else, just hit me up and send me a message there. I did want to share this because sometimes people ask, let me see if I can do this. Sometimes people ask about you, Chris, and they're like, why is he behind an avatar? It's because this is Chris. Can you see that?
I hadn't gone outside in a while, so skin was slightly a little more paler than
This
normal.
is what he looks like. I'm kidding. I thought you would like
Where
that.
did you find that? Did that just like pop up your phone when you're surfing, or?
No, I looked for ugly white men. But he's not ugly. I think it's just because he's wearing an ugly sweater, they call
Yeah,
it.
Cosby sweater. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always fun to me when you think about like movies that have characters that are specifically like fat and ugly. Like that means they had to put out a casting call for people who were fat and ugly, and someone saw that casting call and goes, "Hey, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'll be perfect for this role."
That's me.
Weird.
My day has come. Okay, so what else were you telling me about before we started? Before we
Oh
get to the
yeah,
topic.
work related stuff. Tell me if this is work inappropriate or not. So every morning for my work, we have to check in for project management stuff, and we do a kind of a roll call, and people just ask ice breaking questions. Like what's your spirit animal? Blah blah blah, stuff like that. And so when it was my turn to kind of lead the group, I asked a question. I go, true or false? Never trust a big butt and a smile. And I was kind of so shocked at how many people like were kind of confused. They're like, "Wait, what?" Because these young people, people born within the last 30 years. The song's 30 years old over
Do
that.
peop do people know what song that is?
That's from Belle Biv DeVoe, Poison. That girl is
It's
poison.
poison.
Yeah, that song. And so I thought it's funny, and I got a lot of people coming up to me saying, "Hey, that was pretty funny. That's a funny question. It's the best I ever heard." And then I found that today someone reported me to HR, and, and it had to be like some uptight woman. It had to be like, what self-respecting dude would be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna report that dude talk about big butts and a smile." That's too much, sir. Sir, that is too much.
Did they call you in to reprimand you? What happened?
No, no, they just told my boss who told me, and just like, "Hey, just don't do that again." And I was like, "All right,
Did you
whatever."
say did you say I'm black?
I wanted to. I mean, I thought my blackness would have got me further. I mean, why are you even telling me this? I'm black, and that leads into my second work story.
Oh
I
no.
just had was it not implicit bias training, but the regular kind of work diversity, equity, inclusion training. And so they went over stuff that you and I and pretty much everyone in our audience already knows. But I thought it was interesting that a lot of the examples of whiteness and white supremacy and stuff were like things from decades old. Like they talked about Birth of a Nation, the famous KKK propaganda film, which I watched a few weeks ago, and it was fantastic. Let me tell you. No, it was long. That's my biggest complaint. Not the blackface. It's just too damn long. Like 3 hours of KKK acting as like superheroes and stuff. But yeah, they talked about that and talked about other stuff, and it came off a lot like that article we read during when we were doing our Fresh Prince, the Bel Air review, and how muddled that article, the woman who was putting up that thesis about how it wasn't black enough, or it's like when the title was when representation isn't enough, and she couldn't make a coherent argument. She was all over the place, and it felt very much like this. Like there were times when they were saying that you should essentially stereotype people, but then you shouldn't stereotype people, and it was all over the place.
Was anybody else seemingly confused by it, or could you tell? Or
couldn't tell. Most people were quiet. I don't know if people were agreeing, or maybe some people are like are against this stuff and just don't want to say it, because I do kind of sense there are a lot more people who are kind of against social justice and woke and all that other stuff being put in everything these days. They're not comfortable enough to stepping out and saying I don't like this. This is going too far.
Are they mostly white?
Mostly, yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Mostly white. A lot of women. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. It's like why are so many women into this?
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother episode.
I know.
Yeah, but I definitely think it appeals more to women than to men.
Definitely.
Most of the woke, like the very woke couples that I know, for the most part, the woman brought the husband into woke, or brought the boyfriend into woke. There's a couple of guys I can think of who are woke who do not have a partner, but they're few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely a female-led kind of movement, because as we were doing last week when we were going over the gender swaps and racial swaps, it's primarily male to female. That was primarily the main gender swaps, the ones you're seeing in Hollywood going right now. So to me, it's more like the feminist side of social justice that's trying to get non-white men not to band together with white men and go, wait a minute, we're all kind of being pushed out to the side, because they'll throw us a bone a little bit, like, oh, we got a black male character here and there, but for the most part it's just constantly women heroes, protagonists. And that's not, again, I'm not saying that it's bad by itself, but I'm saying the way they're doing it by putting all these things that are destroying the story or destroying the foundational story of that particular movie or franchise, whatever. That's the main problem.
But a lot of women are eating it up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Not all, but enough.
But yeah, unfortunately.
So you, what's our topic tonight? I'm kidding. We're talking about comedy. So Mystery Chris sent me this clip of Joe Rogan talking to, I think it was Tom Papa, about the death of comedy. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. We're not going to play it, but why don't you tell people a little about what the clip was?
So this is a clip that surprisingly got, well, I should say surprisingly, a lot of people talking about, people who hated Joe Rogan too, because he's talking about the death of comedy movies. And he brought up a point that I've been bringing up to a lot of people, so I thought it was interesting that someone big is talking about this. But he believed, according to him, that he thinks that wokeness is what has killed comedy movies, and he and Tom were trying to discuss, trying to find what the last great comedy movie was.
They were having trouble thinking of one, and the things they were, I was having trouble thinking of one. So. Yeah, Rogan asked him, like, what's the last great comedy movie you saw that was, like, laugh out loud funny, where people went to the theater, they loved it, they told their friends they had to see it. And I think they came up with The Hangover, which is more than 10 years old.
The first one, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and because I've been saying to people, think about it. You can name classic tons of classic comedy movies from the 70s and 80s. Like if you say, let's go from 1970 to 1995, and then think from 1995 until today. Like actually try to think of or write down how many classic comedy movies you can think of in each of those time periods. And I'm more than sure that you're going to find a lot more in the first one from 70s to 95. And even of the ones that you find from 95 till now, most of those are going to be in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
Because since then, they died. And I listen, I do think that the wokeness stuff has affected it, but I don't think that's the main cause. There's something else going on. And so that's why I thought it would be interesting for us to talk about tonight and see if we can try to figure out or give our opinion as to why we think comedy movies have declined in popularity
Yeah,
and quality.
you're making me think of, oh gosh, they mentioned one. Can you hear that dog?
Yes.
He really wants in the room. I'm just gonna. Why don't you pull up that first article, Cole, that we're gonna talk about? And I'm just gonna get this doggy. If you want to read this headline for people, I'll be right back.
Don't laugh. Movie comedies are disappearing. And this is by the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's pretty good article. But yeah, I'll just say my point to when Keri gets back. But yeah, most of these movies in the 70s and 80s are movies that you can quote. Like if you are around people at a party and you just spout off things, people go, oh, yeah, that's from blah, 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 that's blah, blah, blah. But the last big comedy movies, I wouldn't say are movies that, I can think of quotes. Because I was just saying, Keri, that most of the classic comedy movies are movies that are quotable. When you think about
Yes.
it, because even like something like say the Hangover,
Hmm.
I don't think that's a quotable movie. Like there are scenes in it that are memorable, but I can't really think of really quotable dialogue because to me, The Hangover relied on physical comedy and specifically gross out comedy. And I think that's the trend that a lot of these comedy movies have been going the last few years. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, texting him, and he was telling me how he hasn't watched comedy movies in a long time because there are too many penises in it. And I was thinking, he's right. Because, I've been watching The Righteous Gemstones on HBO, and I like the show, but there are a lot of penises in it. And it almost feels like Hollywood's like tried to make up for like all the gratuitous female nudity in the 80s, like all the boobs in horror movies and some of the comedies back then. And it's like, oh, now we have to have equity and have male nudity in all these movies.
I guess I just haven't been keeping up with. We can get into this, but I'm part of the reason why nobody's watching comedy right now because I don't find a lot of newer comedy that appealing.
No.
And when we were getting ready for the show tonight and you told me to make my list of top 10 comedies, they're all old.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
and even things that I tend to think of as recent, like my housemate, my friend,
Hmm.
she's moved back in. She was telling me she was talking to these younger people at the tanning salon, and she said something about, oh, like that woman from There's Something About Mary, and they all stared at her blankly. What
Oh,
are you
wow.
talking about? And then she looked it up and realized that movie's like 23 years old now.
Yeah, it is. And in my opinion, I think that's what kind of started the more kind of shock stuff. And I know there's some shock stuff in the 80s, but I think the current crop, or I should say current crop because it's kind of dead now, but I think that, the whole shock thing, like everybody, when that movie came out, everybody was talking about the scene where Cameron Diaz puts semen in her hair. It's because she thinks it's hair gel, and that was the big shocking thing. And I remember watching it back then. I was like, it's a little funny, but not that funny. And then
Yeah,
American Pie came out, and
the
main character has
pie.
sex with a pie, and it's
Yeah,
so it just kept going. I'm like, all these jokes rely on gross out humor, and it's just not clever and
it's
smart.
not the same as the movies, as you're pointing out, that we quote from the 90s, the 80s, even the 70s.
Yep.
Um, do you want to read some of this? Actually, oh, thank you, Two Sisters and Some Yarn. Let me see if I can put that on screen. There you go.
Oh,
Thank
super
you,
chats.
lady. She says, oh, I forgot we can do super chats now. Comedy sucks now because you can't mock anything or anyone.
You can mock white dudes though.
Oh yeah, that's the one category.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like white dudes, specifically like the South. South has been being mocked for a very long time. Portraying all Southern white people as being meth heads or cousin humpers and just Bible thumpers and just
Hmm.
like backwards type people. And I was kind of surprised because like in the clip that Joe Rogan, when he was talking about movies, he was talking about like why haven't there been any woke comedies, and that's another thing I've been thinking about too. I mean, maybe there are, but there just no one cares to look at it because you think that you would have a movie where it's just making fun of just all straight white guys the whole
But
time.
it's not funny.
No,
That's the thing,
no,
is the woke stuff is not funny. I
yeah,
mean, I think that some woke stand-ups manage to be funny here and there if it's not their primary focus. But once it becomes their primary focus, spreading the ideology, their comedy really suffers.
right,
And
right.
they just become they're just, what's the word? They're like educating you. It's like you're sitting in a lecture.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's read some from this article. This one, because you're saying that it might have something to do with something other than woke,
I think
but
it does because I think because it started earlier. So, but yeah, go ahead.
so this is an article from the Inquirer from 2019. This was before COVID. I'm going to skip the beginning part, but here we go. In December, I saw something that chilled me to my funny bone. When Kevin Hart's Night School opened at #1 at the box office, it was the first comedy to do so in more than 2 years. The Hollywood Reporter recently ran a numbers crunch revealing that comedies last year, so that would be 2018, accounted for an appalling 8% of box office revenue. Now, some of this is a statistical sleight of hand. All superhero movies get dumped in the superhero genre pile, even though Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor are quite clearly comedies. Ditto the Deadpool movies, which exist to satirize superhero movies. And thank God, because it reflects the former American impulse to make fun of the grandiose and the self important. Woe to any culture that loses the will to make those kind of jokes or the capacity to laugh at them. Even accounting for mislabeled Marvel movies, though, the situation is disturbing. We're seeing fewer comedies and laughing less at the comedies we do see. To get a sense of this decline, let's run things back 20 years to 1998. That's your favorite decade. For a full year comparison, you'll find a diverse array of comedies in the top 15. There's Something About Mary, The Nutty Professor, Rush Hour, You've Got Mail, The Truman Show, Patch Adams. Oh, Patch Adams. Even The Waterboy. Way down ballot, you had The Big Lebowski and Rushmore. Did you like those films? Do you remember liking any of those?
Um, I saw Waterboy. Didn't care for that. I never. People are gonna hate me. I never saw Big Lebowski. I never did.
What?
I know. I know.
That
Yeah.
one's good. Rushmore's good. I mean, there's a
Rushmore.
lot
I
on
saw
this
that. Yeah.
this list that are good. Um, but he's right. Comedy was huge then. And this is how old this is. He's talking about 98. I was in college. I was working at an independent video store. And we had a huge comedy section, but we were not Blockbusters, so we didn't have, they had that thing back then where it's like, we guarantee we have a copy of your film.
Hmm.
And they would have hundreds of copies, and we didn't have that. And so I just remember when Patch Adams came out, we only had like 2 copies, and they were always checked out, and people would come in and
Wow.
get angry.
I want to watch Patch Adams.
Yeah. Okay. 10 years later, 2008, you had hits like Step Brothers, Pineapple Express, and Forgetting Sarah Marshall, part of producer Judd Apatow's hot streak that in the previous year included The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Wedding Crashers, and Walk Hard, The Dewey Cox Story. The year before that, Knocked Up and Superbad. In 2009, that's how old The Hangover is. 2009, The Hangover set an R-rated comedy box office record. Things go in cycles, of course, and that kind of wave won't roll on forever. Talent burns out, partnerships disband. Okay, so it goes on. Then it says, now they're talking about streaming services. Did you want to read this part, or do you want me to read this part?
Can you go ahead and read that?
Yeah. Streaming services have filled the comedy void for better or for worse. quote, people go to Netflix for comedy, and they now think of movie theaters as the place of event movies and blockbusters, said Kumail Nanjiani, the comedian. His opinion is backed by evidence. The market share grab now being undertaken by Amazon and Netflix has targeted the mid-budgeted, offbeat trash, I don't know that word, of movies that have been a traditional home to comedy. Studios, meanwhile, have virtually abandoned the sophisticated marketing and careful platform releasing that helped comedies like Back to the Future, and now rely on blockbusters that make most of their money opening weekend. This hurts movie comedy in obvious and abstract ways. There's pretty good research to show that we think jokes are funnier when we see others laughing with us, like in a movie theater. There's several other pieces that we pulled up. Cole, can you just put some of the headlines up? Because it seems like there are a lot of articles about this. We don't have to read through all of them because they pretty much say the same thing. This started before COVID. This was started sometime in like the 2000, after 2010. Part of it was due to streaming services. People prefer to watch comedy. Not that one, but could you put up the Vulture one, Cole? People prefer to watch the comedies at home for some reason. They don't feel like it's an event or a thing where they need to be in the theater to see it.
Do you think, and I'm just thinking out loud, but do you think a lot of comedy shows that have moved to the multi-camera, no laugh track type of a show, sitcoms, you think that's had an influence on people's taste in terms of comedy? Because, as Cesaro was talking about, comedies used to be an event because part of, enjoying comedy is being in that theater where people are laughing and, people really enjoying that atmosphere. And when other people laugh, you tend to laugh as well. And, it's kind of contagious. And so I don't know if people's taste, because they're so used now to the office style comedies without audience and laugh tracks and stuff, if maybe they look at movies and maybe say away and say it's not really necessary. They don't appreciate the live audience as much as, people in the past used to do. I don't know.
That could be some of it. I think it's also, that there's this feeling that it's like this piece said, it's not an event anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's about the quality of the films, because if they're not laugh out loud funny, then why are you going and sitting with other people? I agree. A lot of these pieces, this is the Vulture piece, which says some similar things, but the headline is, "Will a comedy ever play at a movie theater again? Three writers wonder, is 2020 the end of the end of laughing out loud at the cinema?" And this piece, they interview these different comedy writers, and they're all sort of saying the same thing, that people get more enjoyment from a comedy film when they're with other people. Mm-hmm. Like if you watch a movie by yourself, a comedy film at home alone, even if you're streaming it, you might find it funny, but you're not going to laugh as loud maybe as you would if you were watching it with friends and family who are laughing too, because it's infectious, And I think part of this has to do with when the quality of the comedy films started suffering, then it's like, well, why would I even go to the theater for that?
Yeah.
Because I'm not laughing as much with everyone.
Right. And the price of movie tickets too, because I know certainly my movie going habits have changed over the last few years when tickets started going more and more and more up. Because when I saw the Batman a couple of weeks ago, I paid $17 for a ticket here in Texas. Wow, okay. And if it wasn't the Batman or something that I actually really cared about, I would have just waited. Especially now that streaming.
You could have got a gallon of gas with that.
I know. But, now with so many movies that even if they open up in the movie theater, will hit streaming, within, 40 days. Like the Batman's going to be on HBO Max in April already. So, back in the day when you had to wait a whole year for a movie to come out on VHS, or you had to hope that a cable channel would pick it up and show it or something. Now it's just, if you just wait, a month or so, it'll be on one of the streaming, networks or streaming services.
Yeah, they're all going straight there. And some of these pieces talk about even the comedy films that are being headlined by the big stars of comedy, like Will Ferrell. Those are going straight to streaming as well. It seems like there's not any comedy actor that they can bank on anymore to
Right.
bring people to the theater. I mean,
And,
what's
you
the
know,
last comedy movie you saw in the theater? Do you not want to say?
no, I can't. I honestly can't think of. I can think of tons I've seen. Oh goodness, was it? It may have been. This is the end, which Rogan mentioned in his clip. That's the one with Steph Rogan and Jonah Hill. It's the apocalypse movie,
Hmm.
and it was funny. I didn't pay for it. I had a free ticket with a friend. If I didn't have the free ticket, I would have just waited until it came on one of the premium cable channels. So, but that came out in 2013, I think. 2012, 2013.
Yeah, I can't recall either. I think it's been a while since I've been to the movies anyway. I think the last movie I saw in the theater was Joker, which is a couple years, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
The last comedy movie I do remember seeing was I just looked up the date. It was in 1997. It was Booty
Oh wow.
Call.
Keri, you paid money for booty call?
I was with friends. We were going to
I
laugh.
was in a very dark place. Yeah.
And I remember that because there was a man at the front row with this group of like 13-year-old boys. They were clearly there with a birthday party or
Were
something.
they black?
No.
Oh.
And one of them asks, "What's a condom?" And we were like, "See, you shouldn't be in this movie. Why are you in this movie?" That's the only reason I actually remember that one.
Yeah. Well, at least you didn't
but I
pay
don't
money for
remember.
Soul Play. Yeah.
Soul Plane, no, I did not.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a very long time. I think he's hitting on something, and I think some of it has to do with woke.
Mm-hmm.
There's a piece that I sent you, Cole. It's the one that you pulled up by accident a second ago. It's called "The Death of Comedy." I think it's in Aereo. And this piece is, I thought this was interesting. I don't know if you got a chance to read this one, Chris.
No, I didn't.
But this one's interesting, even though it's primarily about stand-up comedy. I think some of this applies to what's happening culturally. So in this piece, I'm going to scroll down to the paragraph, Cole, that starts, a comedian and their audience. Now, even though this is about stand-ups, I think we can all extrapolate and think of this in terms of comedy films. A comedian and their audience aren't like friends in a bar. Their relationship is entirely unique. Comedy relies on its own version of the suspension of disbelief. The audience accepts behavior within the confines of comedy that would be disavowed outside of them. The acceptance only occurs through generosity. We gift the comedian the most generous interpretation of their intentions, and in return, a trust is born that allows us to laugh at the wrong thing in the safety of knowing that everyone knows it's wrong. Without this generosity, we can have no comedy, merely antagonizers, the guilty by association and the righteous. A world lacking the generosity at the core of comedy is a world in which we seek out the worst interpretation of all that we encounter. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what's happening. People, and this whole piece is great. I would recommend people read it. It's more interesting to me than the others because it's sort of getting to the heart of maybe what's happening with comedy is people are afraid to offend in comedy, but they don't seem to have, Joe Rogan touched on this in his interview, they don't seem to have the same restrictions in other genres. Like he said, a movie like Psycho, could still be made and nobody would say, hey, that's glorifying psychotic killers because that, even though that's the subject matter. But if somebody were to make, think of a problematic film today, I don't know, Shallow Hal. They would say, it's phobia, and even though what this piece is talking about is we know it's wrong, we're allowed to laugh at it being wrong because we all agree it's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know, I like this piece a lot.
Yeah, that's...
Listen, okay, one more piece, just because I like it. Comedy is not a science, it's an art. And all art requires bearing a sliver of one's soul. The history of comedy commemorates those who were brave enough to withstand the vulnerability of telling an uncomfortable truth, kindly wrapped within the tameness of a joke. That joke is like a fawn, vulnerable. Its fate dependent on what the world does with it. The fawn will die without care and protection, easily picked off by predators. In a time of commodified outrage in which offense is capital that can be traded for praise and clicks, the forest of fawns that is comedy has become a hunting ground.
Yeah, yeah. So Chris Rock, Chappelle, and other comedians on their level. I throw in Larry David as more comedic performer and I stand up, but they, like the article was talking about, were very good about revealing truths that we all kind of know, but they are expressed it in a way that makes it more palatable for us to accept, or makes it okay for us to laugh at and to go, okay, yeah, that's kind of true. It's kind of like with science fiction. What I love about science fiction is that it can take certain truths and present them in a way that gets you to think about it in a way you hadn't considered before. I think comedy at its best does that, and that's something we're not getting a whole lot from, and certainly the people we're getting it from are people who've been around for a long time. There's not a lot of up and coming comedians and writers on that level, because I was thinking about how many of these big comedy movies that have come out in the past 40-50 years, and just how many of them starred people that got their start on Saturday Night Live or some other show. Like they got popular and went on to have a long career. You think about Bill Murray, and you think about Eddie Murphy, and Adam Sandler. All these people who were able to kind of build them. Yeah, Martin Short, Billy Crystal. And you think about the current crop of comedic performers. Even there's just not a lot of talent that translate, I think, to movies these days.
Because they're picking ideology first. I mean, Saturday Night Live is clearly putting ideology ahead of laughter and ahead of talent. Look at the people that they fired for being inappropriate, making inappropriate jokes. Who was that guy that made the joke about Asians? And
is it Shane? I'm blanking on his last name.
Yeah, somebody in chat knows. I just want to put a couple of these chats up on screen. Yeah, Christopher Gorey says, Chrissy Mayer's funny. Yes, she is. And she has an album out that hit #1 this week, which is awesome. But you're not going to see her on some of the woke lineups. Like I saw Moon Tower Comedy Festival, which is a festival that happens here in Austin every year. I used to, when I worked in comedy, have a lot of comedians who'd come out here and perform for it. And I just looked at their lineup this year, and I have no idea who these people are. And they're probably all woke. But I would love to see someone like Chrissy on that lineup. But anyway, this is a plug for her album. It's called, did I tell you this yet, Chris? It's called Live from January 6th.
I've heard her talking about it, yeah. That sounds hilarious.
What a funny title. Like just, who else would go there? She just... Teresa's Eddie Murphy stand-up is gold.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which did you hear back, I think it was a couple years ago, Eddie kind of semi-apologized for some stuff he told in one of his comedy shows back in the 80s, because some interviewers talking about how like problematic some of those jokes were, and he was like, yeah, well, I'm sorry, I just it was a different time back then. I was like, don't apologize, Eddie.
No,
stop.
Don't give them an inch, because they'll take the whole mile. Okay, did you have anything else you want to say about these articles, or are we going to get to the list?
No, I think I've said most of it. Like I said, it's What? Go ahead.
Well, if you've said all about the pieces, I do want to show you this one thing. I almost forgot. So I found this. This is very interesting, and if you haven't seen it, I think you will dig it. Cole, can you pull up that chart? I found this chart of box office numbers by genre from 1959 to 2020. Let's see. Oh, there it is. So it's hard to see, but that red line that's up at the top that peaks right there in 2021, that is action. So action films are doing great. The blue one that's just underneath it, that's adventure, so action adventure. So the superhero films are all in there. Those are doing great. But then if you look down at the bottom, this this blue line, or it's a green line, this little green line down at the bottom, comedy. It was 3.7% in 2020 of the market share. Then it popped up the next year to 7.9% and then back down to, I think, less than 5%. And look what's doing better. Horror. Horror is doing better. Thriller is doing better. Does that surprise you?
That is surprising. You know, it is, especially like in light of the pandemic stuff, because I remember right when that started, I think, I don't know if it's Netflix or some of the other streaming services had like Outbreak and Contagion and all these like movies with about pandemics, and I was surprised at like how popular people wanting to watch that. I was like, why do you want to watch this when you could be living it too?
Well, I don't think it surprises me as much because I remember reading a study a long time ago about how horror movies tend to do well in times of economic depression or uncertainty or in times of war or otherwise like fearful times. And in fact, some people trace the origin of horror movies back to the Great Depression, to the 20s. You had these big monster movies like Godzilla and King Kong and Mothra, and people were getting into that stuff. And I think part of that might be because people want to escape from the horrors of reality into something that is more manageable, that you can conquer. Mm-hmm. Like they do studies of people that enjoy horror films, and I enjoy horror films. They have this fear. It's not that they're not afraid of horror movies, but they also have this, they anticipate the ending and they anticipate good feelings at the end. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised to see this. I thought horror would be even higher than it was right now, but you know, there's still time. Things are going to get worse.
Well, it's like people's macabre fascination with, you know, death. It's like one of the reasons why, you know, I and so many other people have been watching all these zombie movies and shows, even though I'm kind of over the zombie craze now. It's kind of stayed too long, but there's always this weird fascination with just, you know, I don't know, just with death. But it was done in a way that I guess, I don't know, it didn't quite make you comfortable, but you accepted it. And I'm not sure what the psychological roots are of that, but, you know, the zombie stuff, which, you know, was kind of big in the 70s, 80s, died in the 90s, but then was reborn in the early 2000s. It's kind of lasted till now. I mean, Walking Dead is still on. It's supposed to be the last season, but yeah, there's something there. So
we should do a whole episode on that. I mean, I would love it.
Yeah.
Let's just do one on zombie films. G-Man, thank you for the super chat, G-Man. He says, please watch Death to Smoochie if you never have. Robin Williams at his best. Have you seen that one?
I have to give that another shot because I remember it came out and it was more of a dark comedy, not a black comedy, a dark comedy. But it didn't quite gel with me at the time, but I need to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah, I never saw that one. Thank you for the suggestion. We're taking suggestions tonight for good comedies, by the way. And it doesn't have to be a super chat. Tara says, I recently introduced my kids to Adam Sandler movies. When we watched Wedding Singer, I realized that there is no way there would be a George character today. I love the Wedding Singer, but I haven't seen it in forever. That's one from that same time period, the 90s, that we should revisit. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of, what's on your list? I'm curious, is it all 90s films?
Not all 90s. So this is my top 10 favorite comedy movies. No particular order. Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
That's on my list.
Yeah. I love Pee-wee's Adventure. The Naked Gun. Airplane. Mm-hmm. Not Another Teen Movie, which I actually think is the last great spoof movie, because since then they've done like date movies, superhero movies, which basically the entire jokes of these movies are just references. There's like no jokes. There's like, I think a superhero movie, some guy came in dressed as Kung Fu Panda and goes, I'm Kung Fu Panda. And it just cuts. Like that was, yes, it's that bad. So in my opinion, that was the last good one. What About Bob?
What About Bob's movie on my list?
Yeah.
That's two that we have in common.
All right.
Okay.
Blues Brothers, Hot Fuzz, Harold and Kumar, Galaxy Quest, and Dumb and Dumber.
Wow, what a list. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm expanding my list to the top 13 so I can add so I can add Harold and Kumar. Okay, here's my list. Bring Up Baby. I'm not going to
Hmm.
name the ones that we share in common. Bring Up Baby, Three Amigos, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, The Jerk. I have a thing for Steve Martin
Steve
comedies.
Martin, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a box office star. I would pay $17 to go see The Jerk in a theater with people right now.
I grew up a poor black child.
Yes,
Mm.
that's what you're talking about, though, when
The
you said that.
quotes, the quotes. Yeah.
At
Think about
first,
it. Like all. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was saying, like with my movies, the majority of those movies are movies that have tons of quotes in, and I can't really think of many for comedy movies that have come out in the past 20 years.
You don't think that's just because we saw those comedies when we were younger in our formative years, and so we remember the quotes more, or you think it's really because
It's
there's
some because, but you have to also think about the effect it's had on the larger culture because it's not just between I or you or just friends. There are other movies, other TV shows that made references to these comedy movies from the 70s and 80s, and you just don't see that much going on in society now. So much of the pop culture that exists now is not really built on stuff that happened in more recent type movies, other than like big blockbuster superhero type movies. But comedy movies, not really.
yeah. Okay, my list continues. The Golden Child.
Oh yeah, that devil
It
creature scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. It was so badly animated, stop motion animation.
Yeah, I just remember when he's in the temple and he raps with the bell. He's like, I want the knife. Do you remember?
Yes.
Coming to America,
Yeah.
obviously not this new remake. It was
Oh
awful.
no.
The original, Super Troopers. Do you like
Okay.
that one?
No. No, I've never really been in the Super Troopers. No, no. I saw what they did two of them. It came out a sequel recently, I think. They did the Slam and Salmon. I saw that. I remember, and then was it Club Dread? I think was the other one.
Yeah. See, what does it tell you about the state of comedy that even if I liked the first one, when I hear that there's a sequel now, I'm like, nah, not
Well,
even
how many
gonna.
comedy movie sequels have been good?
Exactly. They're
Certainly not
not.
the Dumb and Dumber sequels. Ugh.
No. Overboard from the 80s. You remember Overboard?
Haven't seen that one.
Kurt Russell, Goldie Hawn, one of
Ah.
my favorite movies. She plays this rich socialite who bumps her head, falls off of her yacht, and has amnesia. And this cabinet maker, Kurt Russell, he had been on her yacht to build her a shoe closet, and she humiliated him because the closet wasn't good enough. And so anyway, he finds her and sees an opportunity to lie to this woman with amnesia and tell her that she's his wife and the mother of his kids, so she'll cook and clean for his all of his kids. But it sounds, I'm not describing it well. It's very funny.
Yeah.
It's also lighthearted. Okay, just one more. Clifford. Do you remember Clifford?
Clifford. I actually just read an article on the history of Clifford. It's a long article. I have to find it, send it to you. But they were talking about the how it was written, and I just remember that part where I think Charles Grodin asked Martin Short, like he's acting up. And he's like, "Can you just act like a normal kid for a moment?" And Martin Short tries to do this like he's trying to smile, but he's doing this weird like demonic looking. Yeah, it was.
That is one of the funniest, most underrated films. I shouldn't be shocked that you've seen it because you know everything. But usually when I mention that movie to people and they haven't seen it, it's like, go watch it now because it's just hard to. Yeah, Martin Short. For anyone who hasn't seen it, Martin Short plays a little kid, like a really annoying kid, and the conceit. I mean, they play it straight, like. Everyone treats him like he's a kid. There's no, like, they hired an adult to play this role. It's kind of funny. Soul Man says Two Sisters in Some Yarn.
Soul Man. Yeah, that's gonna have to be part of your problematic film club. So, yeah.
Oh, Uncle Buck. That's going to be in our problematic film club for sure. Thank you, Liz. And what's this one? Kung Pao, Enter the Fist. I haven't
That
seen
was
that.
pretty funny. Yeah, I remember that when that movie came out. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, Overboard, Kurt and Goldie. Also, Blues Brothers.
Blues Brothers. That's one of my favorite movies. You know, not just comedy movies, just overall one of my favorite movies. Don't mention the sequel. I hate that movie. Like, there's so many sequels that are almost on the same level of hatred, like Ninja Turtles 3 and RoboCop 3 and Alien 3. All threes on the same level. I hate them almost as much as I hate Blues Brothers 2000. I hate that movie.
I don't know what it is with them ruining these classics. One thing I am optimistic about a little bit though is that even though a lot of the comedy seems to be moving to streaming, and I haven't really been a fan of. I can't really think of any great like new comedy film I've seen recently. Don't Look Up. Would that be considered a comedy?
Don't Look Up. I'm trying to remember which one was that one.
It's the one with the asteroid that's heading to Earth. Leonardo DiCaprio's in it.
Oh, I didn't see that
It was
one.
very recent. I don't know if that's considered a comedy or not. It's one of those that kind of straddles the line, but I like that movie. But otherwise, I haven't really seen a lot of comedy films that I think are great, but there have been some comedy series that are pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's one place where, and I'm not really sure what that's about. If people are more inclined to sit at home and watch something that's long form, but why is the writing so much better for TV format? Do you think?
I don't know. I think that's maybe where a lot of writers are going. Maybe it's just a more long term career thing in terms of, you know, you're being hired for an entire season to write, or for several episodes within the season. Because, you know, I think with so many of these shows coming out, I think you're seeing a lot of good writers for certain shows, but there's so many shows right now that you're seeing a lot of people who are not great writers, because you got to think about it. You know, we went from reality TV shows being dominant in the early 2000s to, you know, once AMC got hot with Mad Men and with The Walking Dead, all these cable companies wanted their own 1 hour drama show that are going to be everyone's going to be talking about. Then Netflix gets hot with their shows like Stranger Things, and now all these other companies want to spin off and have their own streaming services and have their own shows that everyone talks about. And so there are a lot of good writers for a number of these shows, but I think there's just so many. There's so much, too many shows out there. You know, I think it's showing the lack of talent, and certainly, you know, kids going to school these days being taught how to find racism and sexism in old literature and old things, you know, hell, even old comedy like we're talking now.
Yeah.
I think that prevents a lot of writers from really honing their craft and writing things that people connect with.
Well, think about how many of the movies in the 80s they would have an issue with now, even though they starred people like Eddie Murphy. I mean, they would probably take issue with Trading Places with him and Dan Aykroyd. Well, this one doesn't. This one stars Steve Martin, but that is The Jerk is a hilarious film, and that scene that you referenced, where you know I was born a poor black child, they would probably have a lot of problem with that. Although it's hilarious. He's sitting there. I remember the scene where he's on the porch and he's sitting with this black family who raised him, and he thinks he's black, but he doesn't have any rhythm, and they're all playing instruments and playing, and he's like just off the beat completely.
See, that was back when we were allowed to stereotype. We could make comedies based on stereotypes. It was funny. I mean, The Simpsons. I mean, Simpsons had a lot of stereotypes in it. It was funny. But now you can't do that. The problem with Apu and all these other things. It's like there's a difference between making fun of someone in a very malicious way versus, you know, having a, you know, a little, you know, fun at someone's expense, you know, in a, you know, friendly kind of jabbing way. And I think audiences in the past were a lot more attuned to that, because, you know, a lot of black comedians would do typical white people do this, black people do this type of jokes. And, you know, some white people say, you know, oh, you know, a white comedian couldn't get away if they did the reversal. And back in the day, they could. I remember seeing lots of jokes by George Carlin and Robin Williams and R.D. Lang that would make jokes about black people, and they would always point out how in the audience the black people would be laughing the hardest, and I'd be at home laughing my ass off, and like white people in the audience would be looking at each other like, is it okay to laugh? Because they were so afraid to laugh at him. But it was something that was very obvious when someone was just having fun versus something malicious. But that's gone. That nuance is completely gone. People don't want to be charitable in their interpretations. Hence why you have people going after, Dave Chappelle, for, going after trans or whatever, according to them.
So part of this, I can explain the woke part of, they have rules, of course, in comedy, and I'm sure people watch this show have heard some of these before. One of them that became very popular when I was working in comedy is they say that you shouldn't punch up, you have to punch down. And that's become so ubiquitous. You'll see it in articles like some of the ones that are talking about comedy and wokeness, and everyone says that like it's some fact, first of all, that you must do this. I don't even agree with that. But if you did agree with it, they have their directions wrong. They don't even understand what up is and what down is, because they're basing their up and down, they're basing that on what marginalized group you're in. They're basing it on the privilege stack. So they will say Dave Chappelle making a joke about a trans person is punching down, right? They make that calculation somehow. And it doesn't matter. It could be, if you made a joke about Oprah Winfrey, and she's one of the most powerful women in the world, right? They would say you're punching down. Why? Because she's a woman and she's black. It doesn't matter who she is as an individual.
Well, not just that, but I think self-deprecation has been lost in comedy as well, where a lot of people won't make fun of themselves. And I don't know if that's because of a low sense of self-worth for a lot of people, that they don't want to make fun of themselves or a group they're in and just have fun. I don't know if they feel they're going to be crucified by other people, but you would think that they'd be allowed to make fun of themselves, at least. You would think. But no.
No, it's kind of, now instead of self-deprecation, they do kind of like Hannah Gadsby, they do this vulnerability on stage. It's almost more like a one-man or one-woman show instead of a comedy show, where they're talking suddenly very seriously about all the isms that they face in life, and you're like, I didn't know I was coming to a one-woman show. I thought it was like comedy.
You're right.
Melissa K says, "Can you imagine Blazing Saddles being made today?" Nope.
It's funny about Blazing Saddles. Back when I was in school, we were putting together a website for our senior show, and they were asking everyone for a quote in the class, and the guy kept asking me. It was really annoying me, and I was like, I kept pushing him off, and then finally he asked me, and I was so fed up, I just gave him a quote. I go, okay, how about Sheriff Bart? Where are all the white women? Where are the white women at? And I didn't think he was going to put it on the actual website. and come like the website going on live, there it is, Chris. Sheriff Bart, where the white women at?
Yes, but what year was this?
This was years way before the social justice stuff.
Yeah, they wouldn't do that now. It would be like what happened to you at work. You'd get reported. They don't put that in the yearbook.
I know.
Oh,
that
man.
reporting thing still gets on me. It reminded me of on Star Trek Discovery, they had a writer named Walter Mosley, who's half black, half Jewish, and behind the scenes he was recounting a story about himself and issues he's had with racism, and he says the N-word, actual word, and someone ended up reporting him to the HR of of his company that was making the show. He's a black man, or half black at least, and he's not even allowed to say it because some person, most presumably, I think it was all white people in the writer's room, was so uncomfortable that they decided to report him to their HR, and he ended up quitting because of that. And I was like,
I kind of appreciate that at least they're consistent.
yeah.
Because usually what they do is say you can't say the word unless you're black.
Yeah.
So at least they're consistent. Well, you can't say it in the writer's room either. Yeah. This is for you, Matt Deckard. I can get 3 camels for a good white woman in some countries.
The sheriff is near. Sheriff's near.
Oh my goodness, look at this. Bungalow Logic says, before the coof, I did a couple of open mics in Chicago. There were, quote, gender inclusive shows and mics listed. A safe space for all, except for comedy. Yeah, that's the death of comedy. I'm still in some Facebook groups that relate to my old job in comedy. One of the ones I'm in is a group where women in the comedy industry report comedians and comedy clubs and managers and agents
Oh.
and stuff who they think are sexist and try and get them fired. It's literally a cancellation
Wow.
group in the comedy
How
world.
how successful have they been?
They've been pretty successful with some things.
Nah.
They do what a lot of social justice people do. You know, they
Yeah.
have this private group, they form mobs, they get petitions, they call places, and they just kind of gin up that outrage. But
Yeah.
that's become a part of the culture. So we titled this "The Death of Comedy," but what's your prognosis for comedy? And then I'll tell you mine.
I Yeah, I think there's a segment of people, people in our generation, and even young people whose natural inclination is kind of go against the grain. And I do think, particularly with the internet's the wild, wild west of it. And I think the more they try to sanitize comedy, I think the more it will push certain people to wanting to be more edgy in their comedy. And I guess the big thing is, in terms of shows and movies and stuff, will we see comedy in the way we saw it back in the day? And I, I think we will, because everything's cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
or, the quote, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so I do think we'll see a rebirth of sort, of comedy. It may not be in the exact same way, but I do think it'll happen because, everything's a cycle.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some parallel there to that meme about how hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. You could do that with comedy, I think, where I've got to think about it a little more. But basically, I think if you're living through a time where everything is suddenly taboo and everything is being censored, and
Hmm.
that's an awful time to be in. But you know what? It's going to make better comedians.
Yeah, and
It's
like
going to
we're
make better comedy is going to come out of it, and then we're going to hit that same cycle where we've got a great time like the 90s
mhm,
where everybody can just take laughs at everyone's expense, equal opportunity offenders, then out of that we'll probably go through another time like this.
yeah, and like we were saying earlier, there's still truth to be expressed, and for the people who are super social justice and woke, what truth is there for that comedy to express? Is why it fails. And I think there's always going to be people who respond to the truth. And so it's just a matter of what that size is at any given time.
Honestly, what they're doing is they're putting new life into old jokes that had gotten really tired, that weren't funny. Like I remember, I was a big social justice feminist then, but I wasn't a fan of Andrew Dice Clay. I remember thinking like, what a misogynist.
Hmm.
And now I wonder if I heard some of those jokes delivered maybe by someone else or something, well, might find them funny now because they're so
Probably.
taboo, you
Yeah.
know?
It's amazing how much controversy was over that. I just recently finished a book on SNL, which future episode of Pop Culture, we will dive into SNL, various various things with SNL. But I read about specifically with some of the people who were part of the cast in the late '80s, like Nora Dunn, who was like very ultra feminist, and how she actually uh, she didn't quit, but she chose not to be part of the show the week that Andrew Dice Clay hosted. And it was like super controversial. Everyone's talking about it. People going, I couldn't believe that, right? And stuff. But when you look at a lot of the stuff he did, it's really tame according to the what comedy was, a few years ago.
Hmm.
I remember Anthony Jeselnik making rape jokes. And I don't recall a lot of, uproar over that. The only uproar I can really think about in comedy last couple of years is when, people made certain comments that were racially sensitive or people considered racist, like Sarah Silverman. I mean, she got in trouble for
Oh
making
yeah.
some joke about Asian people. I forget what the joke was, and I think that's when her downfall began. because
Okay,
she was a
so
lot more edgier before that happened.
you probably don't know this, but in my old life, I was producing Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell on FX.
Hmm.
We had her on as a guest to basically do sort of an apology tour. She was interviewed by him about how inappropriate and racist that joke was.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it was one of those come to Jesus moment, come to social justice Jesus, where the comedian is confessing their sins that they weren't aware that that was racist. And looking back on that, it's so cringe.
It's so sad to see what's happened to them. I remember her show. She put on blackface, not just brownface. I'm talking about actual blackface on her show.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla on the Man Show. Show that couldn't get away with today, but they did a segment where they did a kind of Mark Dice kind of thing where they went on the street asking people things. They were trying to get people to sign to a petition to repeal the 19th, but didn't tell them what the 19th. So they were going up to women and doing that, and all these women were like, "Yeah, let's repeal that." And it was really hilarious. But now Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't do that nowadays. It's just
Is that the one where they were saying end women's suffrage?
yeah, yeah.
And when they were like, women are suffraging? Oh.
Yes. And his famous Carmelo. I love the Carmelo. He put on brown face. He wasn't blackface, brown face, but he was doing Carmelo, almost talking like an escaped slave. Just yell Carmelo. That was hilarious.
I was never a fan of the Man Show. I mean,
really?
Because I was a woke feminist. I hated
sense.
those guys, and I don't actually know if I ever even watched a full episode. I just knew
Oh.
when you're in that cult that you hate them,
Yeah.
But what I find really funny is how woke he is today, given
Yeah.
that past. The blackface past, the girls bouncing on trampolines past, all of that. Like those people.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Even Stephen Colbert. I loved Stephen Colbert back in the day, particularly when it was on Strangers with Candy, which is one of my all-time favorite shows. There's a whole episode where they talk about people who are, I'm using this word because they use it in the show, don't cancel me, but they said retarded, and they were talking about retarded people. They had a whole joke about that. And there's a whole song that Stephen Colbert sings about that, and he gives this advice about Jerry Blank not shouldn't look retarded people in the eye because they have the strength of gorillas. It was like, holy crap! Like,
Wow, and look how woke he is now.
I know, completely sold out, became a tool of the system.
Hey, well,
Amazing.
along those lines, look, Lissa Kay says, remember when Howard Stern was edgy and completely politically incorrect?
He did a whole segment. You can find it on YouTube of him in blackface with Sherman Hemsley. I think she's yeah. And he's straight up talking like escaped slave. Oh well, I talk like this. I was an escaped slave, and he says the N-word a lot in that video. But now he's like, oh, all these anti-vaxxers gotta be punished. It's like you're not relevant anymore, Howard Stern. No one cares about you.
It's like they do. They have this conversion. They come to social justice Jesus. All of their non-woke sins are forgiven, and they have to continue then tap dancing for the woke and making apologies whenever it's required. Twee Girl says censorship created many good comedians. Look at Lenny Bruce. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, isn't it funny that it's the woke who are trying to cancel Lenny Bruce now? There were some
Are they
colleges
now?
that were, yes, they were showing a documentary about Lenny Bruce, and a lot of woke students were protesting and trying to get the movie canceled.
He's dead. I know it doesn't matter, but it's just like,
Yeah.
they probably had no idea who he was even prior to. Just people told him, be upset about this. Like, okay.
Okay. G-Man says The Birdcage. That is a really funny movie. That's true.
Oh,
But again,
Lane
isn't that
Gate,
90s?
Yeah. You can't do, straight men are not allowed to do impressions of gay men anymore. Can't do that anymore. I was thinking when we were talking about Beverly Hills Cop, this whole segment where Eddie Murphy, I think it's Eddie Murphy, or was he mimicking Brosnan Pinchot? He was doing a impression of a gay man.
Did he apologize for that?
I don't know, but
Tara says she thought the Man Show was funny. Well, that means maybe I'll have to watch an episode and see.
you have to watch it and give it a review. Like,
Yeah. I don't get to have an opinion because I never actually watched it. And then this is true. Look at this. Alan Scott says Joe Rogan replaced Howard Stern. Didn't he, though?
in terms of popularity, yeah.
In terms of popularity and saying he's not even saying things controversial, but the way that the media is reacting to it and people are reacting to it, they think it's controversial. So,
Well, just like what we were talking about the clip earlier. When I was looking at, I had a hard time finding the clip for some reason, but I found numerous articles talking about it, and some of them were the big publications. And there was one, I forget what site it was, but they were talking about him, and he's complaining about woke, whatever that is, and they're saying all this other stuff. And at the very end of the article, they go, "Well, at least he's talking about something other than telling people not to get vaccinated." I was like, "When did he say that? When did he say that?" They just lie. They don't
they
care.
don't listen to him. It's like me with the Man Show back then. I knew I hated it, but I didn't watch it. So how did I know that?
But it's like people, their information, so much of this information, and we'll talk about this on a future episode, but so much of people's worldview, particularly young people's, being informed by comedy shows. It's one of the things why I can't look at Saturday Night Live and a lot of these other shows in, I don't know, I can't be as, I don't want to say objective. I can't think of another word, but I can't approach it in the same way because I see how their skits and talking points have influenced a number of people. Like if it was just this and nothing else, then go, okay, whatever, maybe it's just a one-liner thing. But when I see them do like when Pete Davidson played Joe Rogan, did you ever see that clip? And they were talking about the I word. I don't even know you could say the I word on YouTube anymore. It's always changing, but yeah, they were saying it was horse medicine. And it's just like so many people are just tuning into that. They're tuning into, Colbert and all the other late night talk show hosts, which are pretty much the same talking points. And that's what's informing their worldview. They take that as gospel, as truth. A lie repeated enough times becomes truth. And that's one of the things that makes it hard for me to watch a lot of this stuff. I can't separate, what's going on from just the joke, even if the joke it has maybe some truth to it or is kind of funny, because I know how it's the show and these jokes are being served in this larger culture war taking place.
Yeah. Well, let's end on a positive note. What's some fun comedy series or film that you're either watching or looking forward to?
I watched a little bit of What We Do in the Shadows, the series. I still have to watch the movie. But the series is pretty funny. Yeah. The series on FX. And I think it's on the third or maybe fourth season. And I want to watch more of it. I was watching with some friends a little while back, and it's pretty good. I liked it.
I'm going to put up this super chat. Thank you, Alan Scott. He says, a lot of old comedies like Blazing Saddles mock racist. While not woke, they have the same message in the end. That's not good enough, Alan Scott. It's not enough to be not racist. You must be actively anti-racist. It's not enough to be not racist. You have to be woke. That's exactly what they would say. Okay, so the one I like is Cobra Kai.
Oh, yeah.
Have you watched it?
I have. Everyone I've talked to has said positive things about it.
Okay, it's good. It's pretty good. And I keep waiting for each time as a season comes out. You're sort of sitting there like, oh gosh, I wonder if it got woke.
Don't you hate that feeling?
Yeah.
That dread in between seasons.
Yeah. And thankfully, not yet. It's still just genuinely good. And you can tell the creators have a love and a nostalgia for 80s comedies. Mm-hmm. And it really carries over to the series. And yes, there's some parts in the second season where it gets a little bit kind of cheesy, like a high school after school special and that, but it's still better, leaps and bounds better than almost every other comedy series I've seen on TV.
Are they on? It's on the 5th season, right?
Is it? I think it's just a third.
Oh.
I'm bad with numbers, but good with math. So.
Right. Keri's secretly Asian.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We just had fun hanging out, talking about the death of comedy. If you're new to the channel, this is a new channel, please give a thank you to Cole in the chat, who is our producer. It is his birthday week. If you want to wish him a happy birthday. We didn't do it last time, we forgot. So you can wish him a happy birthday. And what else? We have tomorrow, deprogrammed, 6 o'clock Texas time. I'm going to be talking with a marriage and family therapist, Jake Whiskerchin. What a great last name. Whiskerchin. We're going to be talking about the psychology of woke. I'm really interested in talking with this guy. So if you're around, that'll be at 6 o'clock. And then on Friday, we're doing the live show, which is currently called Kerfefe Break, until we have a new name. We have a contest going on. If you didn't know, one of our friends, Greg Wilson, he makes handmade knives, and we have a contest where you can drop in the comments on this video or the last one, drop a name suggestion for the live show, and if we choose that one, we're going to send you a knife. And if you're in New Zealand, we'll smuggle it in somehow.
In a birthday cake.
Yeah. And if you're in New Zealand, we'll send you a spoon.
Oh, I see you played knifey spoony before.
Oh, speaking of, that's a great quote from Crocodile Dundee. The knife quote. I can't do accents. Can you do it?
Oh, I was doing from the Simpsons when they're making fun of Crocodile Dundee.
Right.
But that's not a knife. This is a knife. No, it's not. That's a spoon. Oh, so you played knife and spoony before.
Thank you. We're going to go out on that. How's that? Don't forget to like and subscribe and do the things. Okay. We're going out.
Bye.
Bye, Chris. Bye, guys.